morning and welcome everyone. Very nice to see so many of you, so many faces in this room today to talk about this very important topic about how we can change the fashion sector and make it more circular and sustainable. My name is Cécile Auger. I work for an organization called BSR, Business for Social Responsibility. For those of you who don't know us, we're a non-profit organization that works with a member network of 250 of the largest and most influential companies in the world. Very glad to be here today. I'm here with my colleague Emily, and we'll be working with you also this afternoon in the breakout sessions. What you saw here today is a video that H&M created with artist MIA as part of a big campaign, a campaign called the World Recycle Week, which starts this week. And it's basically, this campaign is about inspiring consumers all over the world to reuse and recycle their clothes that they no longer want. In the video, we heard the ideas of innovation, regeneration, new generation, rewear, inspiration, and this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. So this is how we're going to talk about it, and this is how we're going to cover all these topics. So we have some keynote speeches this morning. We'll then go into a panel between 11 and 12, where we'll talk about solutions for a circular world. We'll then break for lunch and come back this afternoon for breakout sessions. We have 3 breakout sessions. The first one on how to make the fashion life cycle more circular, the second one on materials innovation, very exciting, and the last one on sustainability reporting. So we'll then have the breakout session, regroup again, and then this will be the end of the day. So very full, packed agenda for today, and very exciting. So let's start with the start and the keynote speeches. So we had Carl-Johan Persson on the list. Unfortunately, he's not able to make it today. He had to change his schedule, and he can't be here. But we have his colleague Anna Gerda, who's H&M Head of Sustainability, who has a message from him and really some interesting insight into what H&M is currently doing and H&M's view and ambition when it comes to making the fashion world more circular and sustainable. Just a quick introduction about Anna. Anna, maybe you want to step on stage. Anna was appointed Head of Sustainability at H&M in January 2015. She's also a member of the company's executive management team. Anna's been with the company for a number of years. She's had different roles in the sustainability department, including social sustainability program developer and social sustainability manager. She's a mother of 2 and has worked previously for the Swedish Ministry of Finance. Anna holds a master's degree in political science and also a bachelor degree in business and economics. So Anna will speak about why circularity makes business sense, which is something that's very dear to BSR, about the business side of things and the business case for it. She's going to talk to us about the first steps that H&M has achieved, and also she's going to talk to us about H&M plans to go further together with all of you and with the rest of the industry to lead the fashion sector towards a more circular and sustainable sector. So, Anna, you have about, I think, 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. So, I know that Carl-Johan really wanted to be here today. And even though he can't be here in person, he has sent me a message that I wanted to share with all of you. It says, I am really sorry that I can't be there as planned, especially as I heard that so many of you are here today. Sustainability is a topic that is close to my heart, and I know that the way towards a fully sustainable fashion industry is through collaborations and dialogues, just like this. As some of you may know, it was my grandfather who founded H&M almost 70 years ago. And just like him, I really want H&M to continue to thrive for many, many years to come. So I think the key question here is, not only for H&M, but the entire fashion industry, how can we provide clothes for present and future generations, continue to contribute to growth, fair jobs, and better lives, especially for developing communities, but do so within the limits that the planet simply sets us. Finding sustainable answers to this question is at the core of our business at H&M, and something we've been working with for many years. But to do this, we also need the input and the guidance from external experts, academia, NGOs, and many more, which is why we have invited you all here today. Thank you very much for being part of this, and hope you will have an inspiring day. So, just like Carl-Johan, I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to be here today, either in person, here in London, or joining us from all over the world via video link. And even though we come from different organizations and different directions, I think that the question on how to create a sustainable fashion industry in a world with growing populations and finite resources is on top of the agenda for all of us. This is certainly the case for H&M, both as a whole, but obviously for me and my team. It is our job to help answer a question like this, and to be honest, it's not an easy task, because quite simply, we don't have all the answers just yet. But we are on our way, and we are working to get there. And we're now taking our sustainability work to the next level by raising our ambitions and setting new goals and actions. And I can already now share with you that one of the visions we have set out to create a more sustainable fashion future is to become 100% circular. I will tell you more about this in a short while, but before I do, I'd just like to steal a few minutes and take a look back. So just like many people at H&M, I come from Sweden. And I come from this place up in the north called Östersund. Now, this is a really, really beautiful place. It has clean air and clear water and endless forests, and snow in the winter has always been a given. So as a child, I took nature like this very much for granted. But as I grew up, I realized that this was far from the case in many other parts of the world. So when I was done with studying, I wanted to have a job where I could make a positive difference to the world. I did an internship at the UN. I worked for the Swedish government, but somewhere along the line, I realized that companies, maybe especially so in the fashion industry, can actually make a bigger difference sometimes. And that's how I ended up in H&M back in 2008. More than 60 years earlier, in 1947, Erling Persson started the first H&M store in Sweden. And he had this idea of making fashion and design accessible and affordable to many people. Now, this is a well-known concept in the fashion industry today, but back then, this was really a new thing. And looking at where we are today, clearly a successful one as well. Soon the economic miracle happened, and middle classes grew both in Sweden and in Europe. H&M continued to expand globally, and we actually started our first store outside Scandinavia, here in London. Over the next couple of decades, we continued to grow, and in the mid-90s, we had reached 500 stores, which was a very big landmark for us. At that time, no one really talked about sustainability, and it wasn't until the late 90s that this industry really became aware of its many challenges, like resource use and chemicals and working conditions back in the supply chain. And that was also the case for H&M, and it became the starting point for us and our sustainability work. We set up a sustainability department, we implemented a code of conduct across all our suppliers, and we started to address the different issues that we came across. Over the years, we have moved from having such an issue-based approach to a more strategic one, where we take the whole value chain into perspective. And we have also learned that the key to success is not only to make fashion sustainable, but to also make sustainability fashionable in order to catch our customers' interests and get them on board. Since then, we have come a long way, and there are just a few things I would like to highlight. So, for example, we have a long-term cotton goal that by 2020, we want all our cotton to come from sustainable sources. As part of that, we are one of the biggest users of organic cotton today. And we're also working with a lot of other sustainable materials like organic linen, organic silk, tencel. And just like with organic cotton, we are one of the biggest users of recycled polyester. So all in all, more than 20% of the total material that we use come from sustainable sources today. We also have a global garment collecting program, which means that you can hand in any unwanted clothes in our stores and we give it a new life. And we actually managed to also do closed-loop products out of this, where we have used fibers from old garments and turned into new ones again. And just last year, we managed to increase the amount of just such products with more than 300%. Climate is another really important topic, not just for us, but for the whole industry and the world as a whole. And 2 years ago, we set a goal that we wanted all our direct operations to be run by renewable energy. Today, more than 78% of all the electricity that we use in our stores, in our offices, and our warehouses come from renewable sources. And in addition, I can just mention that we were the first company in our industry to set a holistic and long-term strategy to achieve fair living wages in the supply chain. And we're also at the forefront of transparency by, for example, publishing not only our first, but part of our second-tier suppliers publicly. So we have come a long way, and these are obviously achievements that we are really proud of. But let's return to the question that we posed in the beginning. So the UN tells us that we're going to be 9 billion people by 2050, and there will be a growing middle class. All these people will need clothes, and they will also want to express who they are through fashion and what they wear. So will the achievements made by us and everyone else in this industry be enough to cater for all those people? Will there be enough cotton to make clothes? Will there be enough land and water to support textile production? Well, we don't know exactly what the future will hold, but we do know that the planet cannot afford a textile industry as it looks like today. And to us, it is really clear that if you want to be a successful business also in the next 30 years, you cannot operate the same way as you have done during the past 30 years. The challenge ahead for all of us is nothing less than to change the way that fashion is made and enjoyed. We need to come from making incremental improvements and reducing impacts to taking leaps and achieve systemic change. And this means also getting our customers on board and making them part of the solution. We need to enable customers to make sustainable choices in the clothes that they buy, how they look after them, and also how they can give them a new life over and over again by reusing and recycling them. And the video and the campaign that you just saw in the beginning is one attempt from our side to achieve just that. But at the same time, as we want to safeguard the planet, we can't forget about the people and the communities that depend on and grow thanks to the textile industry. We will need continued growth also in the future, and this industry needs to provide jobs, but these jobs need to be good and fair ones. So the key to do this is to decouple growth from resource use, so that economic and social development can happen, but within the planetary boundaries. At H&M, we believe that we have the size, and that we have the scale and the ambition to be part of making this change happen that is so much needed. And that's why, as I mentioned in the beginning, we've been working to get ourselves ready for this future by taking our sustainability work to the next level and further raising our ambitions. So already last year, we started to work internally with setting and developing new change-making visions across a number of key sustainability topics, like resource use and climate, transparency, equality, and fair jobs along the textile value chain. And when doing that, we don't only look at what we can do and what we want to do as a company, but also at what is required of the industry as a whole, based on the available knowledge and science that is out there. And as part of having such a science-based approach, we have been engaging with a number of external experts, representatives from academia, NGOs, and many more. And I'm really happy to see that some of you are also joining us here today. We will release more information about our future direction during the year, but I can already now tell you that the first vision we have set out to create a sustainable fashion future is to become 100% circular. And to us, this means having a circular approach in how products are made and used, and as part of that, and because materials are so important, only use recycled or sustainably sourced materials. The next step for us will be to break this down into time-bound milestones and set roadmaps on how to get there. And that's something we will do in the next 1 and 2 years. This is, of course, a really exciting task, but not an easy one, because, as I also said in the beginning, we don't have all the answers on how to do that just yet. And even though I am positive that we will succeed, I am also sure that we might make mistakes along the way, because that is simply part of the package when you're working to break new grounds. However, one thing we know that will be key to success is that of innovation. And that's one of the reasons why the H&M Foundation set out the Global Change Award. This is one of the world's largest innovation challenges to close the loop for fashion, and I'm really happy to have a couple of this year's winners with us here in the audience. One of them, Akshay Sethi, will join us in the panel later on and tell us more about his groundbreaking idea, the polyester digester, in a short while. In terms of innovation, we have also made investments in 2 startups. One of them is a UK-based company, One Again, which is developing this really interesting recycling technique, which is all about separating cotton and polyester from blended materials and find a way to chemically recycle them again. The other one is a Swedish-based company called Sellpy, which basically picks up the things you no longer want or need at home, sell them on different marketplaces as a way to prolong the lifespan of the products and give them a new life. Now, we know that we, of course, need to do a lot more in order to reach our vision, but we think that in terms of innovation, these are some important first steps for H&M, and we hope that it will also inspire others to go off the beaten track and find new solutions in this area. Another key is also collaboration, because we know that the challenges that we face today are too big for any company, no matter the size, to tackle alone. And that's also why I'm so happy to see that so many of you have joined us here today, because today is not just really about telling you what H&M has been doing or what we want to do in the future and get your input there, but it's also about fueling this dialogue around this really critical area and transparently share learnings, new ideas and connections, and together take another step towards making a circular economy a reality. Because we are all here with the same interest at hand, and that is to make sure that we have a sustainable fashion industry, so that the 9 billion people we will be in 2050 can enjoy fashion in a way that also enables a healthy and a prosperous planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Very impressive figures, actually very impressive results. I really like what you said, that you have the size, the scale, and the ambition to change things. So that's very great for setting today. It's a real honor for me to introduce Ellen MacArthur to the stage. I don't know if I need to introduce Ellen. I think everybody knows Ellen. We're a very big fan of Ellen at BSR. We actually have a partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and I've personally been a very big fan for a long time, very impressed by Ellen's records. Ellen made yachting history in 2005 when she became the fastest solo sailor to navigate around the world. She has won many races, including the Route de Rome, and also she finished second in the Vendée Globe Challenge when she was only 24 years of age. While she was on sailing, on her sailing trips, and she's going to talk about it today, but she became very aware of the finite nature of the resources that we have, and that the linear economy that we actually currently rely upon. So she stepped away from professional sailing in 2010 to launch the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And again, she's going to talk to us about it. She's currently the vice chair of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Meter Council on Circular Economy. Did I say that right? And she has sat on the European Commission Resource Efficiency Platform between 2012 and 2014. She received the French Legion of Honor from President Sarkozy in 2008, and she was knighted by Queen Elizabeth 3 years before that. So, Ellen, please, I'm very delighted to welcome you on stage. Ellen will speak about the need for circularity, what it actually means, and why collaboration is so important to achieve it. Ellen, thank you.
Thank you very much. Over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to take you through the journey that I've been on, which has been an interesting one personally for me, but also a very unexpected one. It all began as a child, and I firmly believe that when you're a child, anything and everything is possible. The challenge is holding on to that as you grow up. And for me, as a 4-year-old child, I had the opportunity to sail for the first time. It was unlikely. I was a child that grew up in Derbyshire in the UK, about as far from the sea as you can get. And it was with my Auntie Thea on the East Coast. And I will never, ever forget the excitement that I felt as I saw the boat for the first time. But the most amazing thing was the feeling of freedom that I felt when the sails hoisted for the first time. Because as that 4-year-old kid, I felt that boat could have taken us anywhere in the world. And it was there and then that I set the goal to somehow sail around the world. I had absolutely no idea how I'd make that happen, but I knew exactly what I wanted to achieve. And so I took what steps I could as a kid to get closer to that goal. And initially, those steps were pretty small. I saved my school dinner money change every single day for 8 years to buy my first boat. Every day I had mashed potato and baked beans, which cost 4p each, free gravy piled on top, and the rest of the change I piled on my money box every day until that pile of change reached £1, and then I would drop it in and literally cross off one of the 100 squares I'd drawn on a piece of paper. And that led to the first boat, and then the second boat, which was the boat that I sailed around Great Britain on when I was 18 years old as my first solo adventure. So imagine how it felt, just 4 years after leaving school, age 17, to be sitting in a boardroom here in London in front of someone who I knew could say yes and make that dream come true. I was absolutely petrified. I was so nervous. And luckily, he did say yes, and that led to one of the most extraordinary 8 years of sponsorship through Kingfisher for my sailing achievements. The first time I sat in a design meeting to design this boat was just unbelievable. We were drawing lines on a piece of paper that would turn into a boat that I was going to sail around the world on. I couldn't believe it. And the first time I sailed her in Auckland Harbour, if I'd have died there and then, I would have been one of the happiest people on earth. She was beautiful. I was so happy I sailed her halfway around the world in training, and then following that, sailed in my first race on an open 60 in this boat. It was solo from the UK to America. Now, when I started the race, I was kind of, 23 years old. I was the young girl in the open 60 who'd been lucky enough to find a sponsor. But by the finish, I'd won the race. That not only surprised me, but it surprised all the media, and that put massive pressure on that I wasn't expecting for the Round the World race later that year. The Vendée Globe, solo non-stop round the world, over 3 months at sea, and it is non-stop. You probably don't see the land at all during that journey. It was awesome. It was amazing. It was everything I'd ever dreamt of. Seeing the dolphins, seeing the albatross in the Southern Ocean, surfing down 60-foot waves underneath the moonlit sky at night was just absolutely out of this world. I missed icebergs by 20 feet. I sweated at the equator, and I managed to finish second in that race after 94 days at sea. And many people would think that the finish would be an amazing moment in your life. But for me, it was a massive anticlimax, because all my life I'd had that goal to sail around the world. And the moment you cross the finish line, it's gone. And it's gone at a moment when your world is totally turned upside down, because you're the center of media attention. Everybody wants a piece of you. All you want is the normality of your life back, because you've been through something actually quite hard, quite traumatic, and quite exhausting. And that normal life just simply not there anymore. Normal life was left behind. And actually, I realized that normal for me now was actually being at sea. That's where I felt I had control of my life in a bizarre way. And it's where I wanted to be. I absolutely loved it. It's all I'd ever wanted to do. So within 6 months of finishing the Vendée Globe, I decided to go around the world twice more. Once as a fully crewed attempt to try to be the fastest boat ever to sail around the world. Not solo, but with a crew. There were 14 of us that went on the boat. We lost our mast in the middle of the Southern Ocean and ended up pulling out into Australia. And then 2 years later, I set off on my own to try to be the fastest person ever to sail solo non-stop around the world. And that needed a very different craft. It needed something called a multi-hull. Now, these are very different from the picture I just showed you of Kingfisher. These boats don't have any lead underneath to keep them the right way up. They rely, in a way, on their stabilizers. To give that boat some scale, I could climb inside that mast all the way to the top, and she would not have fitted within this room. She'd have needed a room and a half. She was 60 foot wide and 75 foot long, all built out of carbon fiber, and so exciting to sail. As you can see, they're quite wet. This was a different boat, a French friend's 60-footer. They're lively. Things don't always go right. There were 11 guys on that, and they did not intend to capsize. And when you see how far the sea is underneath that guy hanging from the net, It's a long way down. Imagine that in 60-foot waves in the Southern Ocean when the nearest help is 5 days away. It's not really something you want to reflect on too much, and something I understood very well, because I was one of the 5 crew on this boat when we flipped it 60 miles offshore. And even that took us 48 hours to get into a port upside down, slowly towed by a tug. In the Southern Ocean, you have no chance of that. The ship would take 5 days to get to you, and then 5 days to get you back to a hospital. And no helicopter can land down there because you're 2,500 miles away from the nearest town, and no aeroplane can land, obviously, because there are no runways. So you really are in the middle of nowhere. And it's a very, very different world that you enter. Sleep is incredibly hard to come by. You sleep for 7 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes half an hour, very rarely 1 hour, incredibly rarely 2 hours in a row, and only once in the 2.5 months it took me to do the trip did I sleep for 3 hours in a row. I wore a sleep monitor the entire time. And it's quite brutal, because you're always snatching sleep, and you know at any time something can go wrong. So you're living on your nerves and at speed. And we all know what it's like to travel in a vehicle, a train or a car. The faster it goes, the more stressful it becomes. You know, if you're driving at 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, it's not that stressful. It can be stressful, depends on the road, but take that to 70, 80, 90, 100, 110. You are gripping the wheel, you have white knuckles, and you're trying to keep that car on the road. Now, we don't have a road, we have an ocean. We don't have headlights, we don't have a windscreen, we don't have windscreen wipers, and we're out there in the middle of the night. So you really are living on your adrenaline, trying to keep that boat going, trying to push the boat at 100% of the time for as much of the time. Because when we built her, the record stood at 93 days, and during the time we were building her, a Frenchman took a boat 25% bigger, designed to be sailed by 10 people around the world on his own. Everyone said it was impossible because nobody had ever done it on their own in a multi-hull, and he took the record from 93 days down to 72. So I had to push pretty hard on a smaller boat in exactly the same conditions. And you do enter a different mindset. You know, if I said to you all, go off now into London and find everything that you will need for your survival for the next 2.5 months, everything. That's food, that's fuel, that's medical equipment, that's toothpaste, that's everything you need to survive. Yet you're on a boat that's light, it's fast, and it has to stay light in order to break the record. So you take the minimum fuel for the generator, you take the minimum food. I took 72 packets of food, minimum clothing. And when you leave, when you cross that start line, every single day of that trip, you count down what you have. Every day, the header tank for the diesel goes down. Every day, the food packets go down. You count them, you watch them, and you become unbelievably aware of what the word finite means. Because on that boat, what you have is all you have. There is no more. And I'd never, ever translated that to anything outside of sailing, nor did I wish to, until I set foot off that boat at the finish line. And I suddenly realized our global economy is no different. It's entirely dependent on resources we have once in the history of humanity. Yet with a growing population, we're using them up faster and faster. And it was a bit like, in a way, seeing something under a stone. There's something there. There's something that you don't expect. There's something actually probably you don't really want to know about. But I just felt I just couldn't put that stone back down. I could not just ignore what I'd seen and carry on doing my dream job of sailing around the world. I just had to learn more about it. I just had to try and understand, in parallel to sailing initially, you know, how do we use resources in our global economy? How does it work? And I began what was effectively a new journey of learning for someone who has no background in economics, to go to understand how we use resources. And this was a coal-fired power station here in the UK, standing in the burner that goes to 2,000 degrees when it's lit. These guys were welding the pipes that carry the steam that drive the turbines. And, you know, I looked a lot into energy, renewable energy, coal-fired power. I just wanted to understand this system of energy and how it worked, just like I had on the boat. And coal was a subject that was very close to my heart, and I couldn't help but think about that when I was at that power station. Because my family were originally coal miners. This was my great-grandfather. He spent 50 years of his life underground. And when you see that picture, you see a really old photo. It's black and white, it's all fuzzy, and no one has trousers with a waistband quite that high in this day and age, although I challenge H&M to make some. Maybe they'll come back. But you see that, and you see another era. You know, you see another time, you see another period. But yet, this is me with my great-grandfather. And they are not his real ears, by the way. They were his Spock ears he put on for his great-grandchildren. But we were really close. And I remember listening to the mining stories he told of life underground, the fact they took canaries underground to smell the gas, the fact that he worked for years underground with ponies that used to pull the coal out. And when those ponies retired from the pits, they used to live in the fields around the mouth of the pits, and the miners would still save them the crust of their sandwiches because they'd worked with them for so long. And all those stories to me seem like they were yesterday. And I remember when I was looking into resources, I looked at many websites, I spoke to many experts, scientists, just trying to understand how does this all work. And one place I landed on was the homepage of the World Coal Association. And there in the middle it said, we have about 118 years of coal left. And I remember thinking, well, 118 years, that's well outside my lifetime. But then I did the calculation and I realized my great-grandfather had been born exactly 118 years before that year. And I sat on his knee till I was 11 years old. And you realize it's nothing, absolutely nothing in time nor in history. And that's what made me make the decision I never, ever thought I would make, which was to step away from solo sailing and try to understand the basics of how can our global economy function in the long term. Not how can we eke it out a bit longer, but how can it actually work? How can it actually thrive? How can we have an economy that's decoupled from resource constraints, as Anna said? How could it actually work? And you realize very quickly, it's not just energy that was talked about so much when I was doing my research in the first decade of the year 2000, but also materials, plastics, metals, rare earth metals. New Scientist 2008, how many years left? There were some stunning statistics in there. 13 years of indium in every LCD screen, 40 years of tin, 41 of zinc, 29 of silver. These are small numbers, and that's at current consumption rates back in 2008. Those rates have all increased. And then you realize that they have increased because we have a growing world population. We're using these materials faster and faster, and we know that line can't go vertical because the majority of it is based on finite materials. So you have to ask the question, what next? And the economy that we have today is predominantly linear, as was mentioned earlier. We take a material out of the ground, we make something out of it, and then ultimately it gets thrown away. We do cycle some of the material within those products, but we don't design them at the outset for that. The business model is generally to buy materials to make a product and sell them. Whether you're selling clothing, whether you're selling cars, whether you're selling buildings, generally they get sold. And so what you find, and this is what I found when I was doing my research and speaking to chief executives and economists, trying to understand, what the strategy was for this. If we know we have finite materials, if we know that some industries are seeing, raw material price increases of 500 million euros in 12 months, wiping away half their operating profits. What's the solution? How do we deal with this? And so much of the narrative back then was around efficiency. We need to make a product, let's say on 2010 figures, using 10% less energy and materials every year. That will isolate us from the massive volatility that we're seeing in raw material prices. We'd at that time seen a century of price declines erased in 10 years. And then to use less materials, so less energy, less materials. But then if you pan that out for 10 years on your 2010 figures, does that mean by 2020 you're making nothing with nothing? You have no industry, no employment. There's no business because your goal is zero. Surely there was a different way to do things. And it was then that I began to come across different schools of thought, industrial symbiosis, biomimicry, cradle-to-cradle design, the sharing economy, the performance economy, different schools of thought that actually if you pulled them together and changed the entire system, systemic change, which was really not discussed at all when I was first looking at this, then you could build a system that could thrive and flourish in the long term. And one of the people I met was a chief executive in Holland. He made industrial carpet tiles. Now, he didn't say to his workforce, we're going to build a more efficient carpet tile. He said, I want to design a carpet tile that's made to be made again. I want to design it so that we can recover all the materials, we can feed them back into the system, and we can make the next carpet out of the last one. They made it so they could disassemble it. They took the yarn from the top of the carpet. They sent it to their suppliers. Initially, 2 said yes, 1 was on the fence, and 2 said no. 2, depolymerization and then repolymerization. After a few years, they were all doing it. They took the base, they melted it down, they turned that into the base of the next carpet, and their goal was to do that using entirely renewable energy by 2025. It was an entirely different business model. It was an entirely different concept. It changed everything. It changed everyone's thinking, not just the designers, but right through the business. everything began to change. And that hugely inspired me. You start to then apply that to the automotive industry, to the buildings industry, to the fashion industry. How do you make this system work? How do you make this system regenerative and restorative so you can recover the materials and feed them back into the economy? And not just technical materials like these ones, the plastics that were sitting within these carpets, but also biological materials, cotton, paper, food waste. All of these materials are also of incredible value because anything biological for billions of years has gone straight back to the earth. They're not toxic and they're regenerative. Yet we've broken that cycle. We're taking this stuff away. 95% of food waste across the world gets landfilled. It doesn't go back to the earth in the way that it can be regenerative. So take those two cycles, the biological, this one, and then the technical, the stuff that doesn't biodegrade. How do we revalorize that and put it into cycles? Effectively, a circular economy. And Anna mentioned systemic change. And I've got an example I'll show in a minute about what that is. But circular economy is not about saying, let's design something differently. It's about designing an economy. It's the product, it's how the product flows through the economy, it's what's in the product, it's how you sell the product, how you market the product, how you finance the product, how you recover the product, and how that feeds back into the economy. And that could be a car or my jacket. How does it work? How does it fit? How can it be restorative and regenerative within the economy? And when we were discussing this in the early days, we realized that actually if there was so much potential in this basic idea that we were seeing across the world, then surely giving it a name and bringing it to the fore and trying to prove the economics of what this circular economy could look like was very important. And it was with the goal of accelerating the transition to a circular economy that we launched the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in 2010. We work in 4 areas. We work on education across the world in secondary, but also with universities, across design and engineering, business with our fellowship program, and then more broadly in the other areas. We have an international partnership with many universities that are doing research and teaching in circular economy. Because if the whole generation leaves education, seeing a different way that the economy can function, it'll happen. But we're not there yet. We also work with business. We work with cities, regions, government through our Circular Economy 100 network, but more importantly, our global partners, of which one is H&M, who have real goals behind what circularity looks like, who don't have all the answers. We never have all the answers, but it's about setting the goal and then working out how to get there. Not dissimilar in a way from sailing around the world. The third area we work is on general communication around the idea of a circular economy and getting it out there more broadly. And the fourth area is perhaps one of the most important, which is analysis and insight. How do the economics of this stack up? What does the circular economy really look like? How can we really understand this in more detail? And to do that, we drew what we call the butterfly diagram, which breaks the economy into those 2 halves, technical on the right, biological on the left. Now, the biological cycle basically mimics natural systems. And if you look at the materials, they flow back to the beginning and then they feed back into the economy. But you can do something in there, for example, called cascading, which would be taking a piece of timber and either making a decision of burning it, which we do in many places in the world, or turning that timber into a table. At the end of the life of the table, it gets chipped down and turned into chipboard. At the end of the life of the chipboard gets ground down into particle board. If that's designed correctly, that particle board can then enter the biological cycle at the end and be regenerated into fertilizer and heat. So it's the cascading of a material through the economy. How much benefit can you get from everything within the economy? And then take that to the technical side. So on the technical side, you could just talk about the design of a product, but it's also the value in that product as a whole. Now, this clicker has more value as a clicker than it does the components within it. The components within it have more value than the materials within it. So how can you keep that clicker at its highest value and utility at all times? Think about cars. Same thing. We build a car, eventually, 10 years, most of them, they're gone. But actually, how can you design parts of the car so that you can regenerate them? How can you build parts of cars that are remanufacturable? This happens already across the world, and in fact, one of our other global partners, Renault, have a remanufacturing facility where they take broken engines, gearboxes, and fuel pumps and then resell them with the same warranty as a new one, but they have 80% less energy and 80% less materials in them than a new one. Now, when you change the business model, when we don't buy the car, but we have access to the car, who cares when the engine came from, where it came from, when it was remanufactured? You want it to work, and you want it to be smart, and you want the functionality of that car. So that changes the system. So you start to look at maintenance, reuse, remanufacture, the whole system. What we call these the inner loops, where the most value lies, as in this clicker as a clicker, and then the outer loops, which are recycling, which we would call the loop of least return. because more value lies on the inner loops. You absolutely want to recycle, but there's more value on the inner loops. And it's not, as I said, just about design. It's about new business models to enable that car to come back, that car to be remanufactured, that item of clothing to come back, maybe be remanufactured. Reverse cycles, the system that brings the clothing back, and in H&M's case, that's us. And then the enablers and the favourable system conditions, such as working with the European Commission, looking at how you can encourage businesses to do this more easily, to knock down the barriers of importation, exportation of products, materials, second-hand goods, all of those things. And we've done 6 reports now looking at the economics, 3 in 2012, 2013, and 2014. The first was looking at medium complexity goods for Europe, so products that cycle in more than 1 year and less than 10, like commercial vehicle, washing machine, smartphone, mobile phone, and cotton as a textile cascading through the economy. That was $630 billion per year economic opportunity by 2030. The second one was faster moving consumer goods. That was a global study, $706 billion per year economic value. It's a 3.8 trillion market, and we currently only recover 18% of that by value. So we're losing billions and billions, or trillions, from the economy because we haven't built a system that works. And the third one was looking at opportunities in global supply chains. So when you take this out of a territory, where are the opportunities and where are some of the barriers to making this happen? And the third one was released in conjunction with the World Economic Forum. And just to paint a picture on this, all this should have value if it's designed in the right way, and it can be recovered in the right way, and it can be valorized, every single part of it. And this has huge value. In every single ton of food waste, there's $8 of fertilizer, $16 of heat, and $28 of electricity. Yet 95% of that across the world ends up in landfill. So what about the opportunity of cities to not just aggregate food waste, but human waste, biological waste, anything that biodegrades, cotton, perhaps, at the end of its very last cycle. So how could this whole system be valorized for the global economy? Last year, we produced a different report which broadened our understanding of the circular economy. The first 3 looked at net material cost savings, just the raw material cost saving of switching to a circular model. This was different. This looked more broadly at structural waste within the system. So the fact that cars are parked, for example, 92% of the time. Most of the time they have less than 1.5 people in them. That's the average within Europe. Our houses are empty a lot of the time. There's 11 million empty homes across Europe. So how can you valorize those assets to a higher level before you even change the design? And then you see things like Airbnb come along that become the biggest hotel chain in the world in 4 years. They've never built anything, but they've valorized the structural waste within the system. Every city is made up of 50% roads and parking lots. They're empty a lot of the time. They're full a lot of the time. How can you valorize that system in addition to the net material cost savings? And we looked at the built environment, mobility, and food systems within that study. And we found that using the digital revolution, for example, allowing us to have access to a lot of that structural waste, the benefit to the European economy from just the digital revolution was 900 billion. If you apply a circular lens to that, that jumps to 1.8 trillion. And that was by 2030. And the most important, perhaps, for this conversation here, and the most recent of the reports that we released at the Foundation, the report I'm going to end on, is the new plastics economy. Now, this is rethinking plastics, particularly plastic packaging across the world. We currently make every year about 300 million tons of plastic, and 78 million tons of that is plastic packaging. This is very fast use, quick cycling materials that are generally only used once. Now, I was under the impression we were quite good at recycling. We have good sorting systems, particularly in Europe. And actually, we found when we did this study, looking at the global flows of plastic packaging, we initially wanted to work with the experts, but we found that actually nobody had really done an entire study on how plastic packaging flows through the economy globally. So we looked at the numbers, and this is plastic packaging, 78 million tons. We discovered that actually, of that 78 million tons, 40% is landfilled, will never be recovered. 32% leaks, because in Asia and many emerging markets that have a lot of plastic, because anyone can make plastic anywhere in the world and sell it, it doesn't need to conform to anything, it can have any additive in it. 32% leaks into wherever. 14% is incinerated and used for energy recovery, and only 14% is collected for recycling. Of that, 4% is lost during the recycling process. 8% is recycled but downcycled to a lower value product that the next time will move out of the chain. And 2% of plastic packaging actually returns to the same quality of plastic. Now, this is an incredibly high volume, low value material. And it's a really hard nut to crack, Because the biggest manufacturer of plastic can't fix it, the biggest retailer can't fix it, the chemicals industry can't fix it. What's needed is everybody to sit around a table and work out what could actually work as a system. And that's what we've been doing through this report with the World Economic Forum and McKinsey, is bringing together over the last 2 years all the people from the value chain, from all the different industries, from the industry bodies, from the chemicals industry, the retailers, everybody, the reprocessors, to work out how we can build a plastics packaging system that can really function in the long term. And that's a great example of systemic change, because no one can do it on their own. Everyone needs to move in the same direction at the same time, but the benefit is absolutely huge. And what we found with the plastic packaging was that actually there are many externalities that we don't really understand. We were looking at the amount of plastics in the ocean. Obviously, we don't know exactly, but we found in 2014 versus 2050, the amount of plastic in the ocean would equal that of fish by weight, which is a horrendous statistic. And at the moment, the plastics packaging industry total profit pool does not cover the current externalities. And we're only beginning to understand those, as Anna said, using a science-based approach, trying to work out what this really looks like, because we don't know. You know, we have this as a result of the Industrial Revolution, this system, this one-way linear system, but actually we need to change that. We know quite clearly we need to change that, and some things are easier to change than others, but having a goal is absolutely vital. And then just to end, quickly a few examples of what's out there at the moment. I'm going to start with the biological side and move to the technical side. Climatex, a fabric built by a firm called Rona. They wanted to create a synthetic biodegradable fabric. You can actually eat it if you want. It is really non-toxic. They started working with their chemical company suppliers. They had 8,000 chemicals that went into their fabric. They broke it down to 16, which was enough to make an entire range of fabric, which they supply to airline seats, for example, because you don't want toxins within the plane, because obviously you're in a sealed space. And that very quickly grew by 2002 to be a third of their revenue. A big part of it. And actually the factory that made that had cleaner water coming out of it than the water that came in from the river above. Covative, a very innovative company in the US, a guy called Eben Bayer, during his time at university, discovered a different way of creating a replacement for styrofoam. Obviously a big issue is waste all over the world. There's a lot of it in the oceans and the environment and everywhere. So he grew styrofoam effectively out of mycelium. So it's not styrofoam, but it's a replacement. It's entirely biological. That will never become waste, no matter where it ends up, even in a field, because it will biodegrade and enter the biosphere. He now has huge companies supporting him, and, well, his clients, Steelcase and Dell, and he's on price parity with styrofoam. Now he's built a big factory in the US. Splosh, very innovative, a bit of bio and a bit of technical. The cleaning products that they produce, you don't buy in a shop. They send them to your door. You add this slug, you add warm water, stir it around. The case of the slug dissolves biologically. It becomes the cleaning product because it's very concentrated. The bottle is 100% cyclable. The boxes it comes through the door in are 100% biodegradable. And the cleaning product itself is 100% biodegradable. So it's a systemic approach in the way they deliver the products, but also what sits within them. Technical cycle, again on the right, just a couple. So Philips, also one of our global partners, work in the Netherlands with a company called Turn2 to provide lighting for office space and indeed office space. Now, if you have a contract with Turn2, you don't pay an electricity bill for your lighting. You pay to have 400 lumens at desk height. Philips pay the electricity bill. They own the lighting. They repair the lighting. They maintain the lighting. And when more efficient lighting comes along, they change it out because they pay the bill. And then the old lighting goes back to Philips, who know exactly what's in it, who know exactly how it's made, and then they can remanufacture it or recover the components or the materials and put that into the lighting of the future. Another would be Airbnb that I've already mentioned, using the digital revolution and what we all have in our pockets to unlock spare capacity within the economy that otherwise wasn't unlockable. You know, B&Bs have been around for a long time, but suddenly this makes it global and it makes everyone able to access what currently couldn't be valorized, benefiting us as the owners of the house with the spare room, but also benefiting the economy as a growing part of the economy. You're unlocking, you're decoupling growth from resource constraints. You're using what's there already. And then just to finish, if ever there's a challenge, shifting from linear to circular is definitely one. It's the greatest challenge I've ever been involved with in my life, and we play a tiny part in this. It's a massive economic shift, but just look what's possible in a lifetime. When my great-grandfather was born, it was 1894, there were 25 cars in the entire world. When he was 14, we flew for the first time in history. Now 3 times the population of the world back then fly every single year. When he was 40, we built the first computer. Then he said it wouldn't catch on, but within 20 years, we turned it into a microchip, and there will be millions of them in this room here today in our IT equipment, enabling so much more. 10 years before he died, we had the first mobile phone. It wasn't that mobile, and it definitely wasn't smart. But quite quickly, it became very mobile and incredibly smart, and actually allowed totally different investment in infrastructure in emerging markets, enabling them to leapfrog a lot of the technology that we have. And then as my great-grandfather left this earth, the internet arrived. If ever there is a time to do this, it's now. You know, this is being streamed to the rest of the world. We can exchange information in seconds, so anything really is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Extremely inspiring. Just a few notes. So what I'm keeping from this is that it's about changing the system, the entire system. It's about designing an entire new economy. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. But the good thing is that there is hope, and you share that with us, and that we need everybody to work on it. So, you know, really everybody in this room and everybody who's listening to that and everybody in the world, we can contribute to that. The question is, how do we do that in practice? And this is what we're going to carry on discussing today. I'm very pleased now to introduce Dilys Williams. Where is Dilys? Oh, she's at the back. So Dilys will be facilitating, excuse me, I was looking for the word, facilitating a very interesting panel to talk about with a very diverse range of panelists who are going to give us very different perspectives on circularity and circular economy. So Dilys is coming somewhere. Here she is. Dilys, welcome to the stage, and Dilys is going to introduce you to her panelists. Dilys.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here with you today. I'm sure already there are a lot of questions from the previous conversations. I've certainly got a lot. And between us in the room, we share an incredible amount of expertise that we hope during the day we'll be able to pull out both through this panel discussion and through the workshops. So already I'm aware of the fact that we've got an hour. We're going to spend about half of that talking very directly to the panelists, and then we're going to open to you guys, and also there's going to be a lot of tweets coming in and questions coming in. I'm sure there's a lot of people around the world that are already sending those in now in response to both Ellen and Anna's presentations. But first of all, I'd like to introduce my panelists. You know them all already. So Ellen, please, can I invite you back to the stage? We have Richard Holland. I'm not going to go through the bios because you've got them all, and I think it's better for us to use the time to talk about the contents of what we want to discuss. Akshay Sethi, greetings Akshay, Michael Arner, and Anna Gedder, who needs no introduction. So in a few moments, I'm going to ask each of them to talk about the things that actually they are most excited about in relation to this conversation, and the things that they feel are the biggest challenges. But first of all, to set the scene from a fashion perspective, I mean, we're here today to discuss ingenuity. We've heard about incredible ingenuity, being in the middle of nature. But actually, our current age, the Anthropocene, is defined by us actually messing up the only known living planet in the world. So what kind of wisdom have we been using? And what kind of wisdom do we need to switch to in order to be able to restore the only living planet in the known universes? So to talk about how we might better use that ingenuity in relation to fashion is a really, really interesting thing, because it's something very personal to us all. We heard from Ellen about how making something very personal is absolutely imperative. So each of us defines ourselves through how we dress, how we interact with each other. It's a really vital part of being human. We are pretty much the only creatures who are able to create, acquire a second skin. Most of the time, for most of us, it's by choice. And it is an incredible part of nature and skilled hands that bring this together. But this, at present times, comes at a price that is too high. The world's second most polluting industry, drawing on diminishing resources that we've heard about, that cannot continue. And for a business like H&M to be able to publicly say this system is broken is testament to the fact that we already know that is happening. So we're talking about turning things around. We've seen graphs that are going up and down. At the moment, whilst there are some good things going on, the graphs are going in the wrong direction. In 2010, the global apparel industry produced more than 150 billion garments. Just looking at cotton, which is less than half of that production, it creates, in 1 year, cotton production creates the equivalent of driving to the sun and back more than 1,000 times in its emissions. So whilst we've agreed globally through COP21 to make all sorts of great commitments to reducing our emissions, the current trajectory, cotton, for example, again, is set by the year 2030 to generate 160 million tons of CO2 unless industry changes. And it's currently only at 107. So we're not just talking about keeping as we are, we're talking about a huge reversal. So the discussion, as Ellen said, is now. So just to kick off the discussion, I would like to ask each of you to say something very briefly about what you think is the greatest opportunity of human ingenuity in relation to fashion and our current predicament, and what you think is the biggest challenge. Anna, I know you've talked a little bit about it already, so just very briefly, and then we'll move on.
Okay, well, so I'd like to end on a positive note, so I start with a challenge to begin with. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have when it comes to human ingenuity is that we're not collaborating enough and that we're not transparently sharing the learnings and the ideas that we have. So instead of finding things that build on each other and create synergies, we create parallel solutions that actually cannibalize on each other. I think one of the more positive things and what really keeps me happy during the days is the amount of creativity that we see can come out of human ingenuity. And just one example, as I mentioned in the presentation, we had this Global Change Award, one of the biggest innovation challenges to close the loop profession. And when we launched it, we were a bit afraid that we're not going to get any contributions. But we actually managed to get more than 2,700 contributions from 112 countries. And I think that is really one example of all the creativity and the amount of solutions that are already out there.
Thank you, Anna.
So I'd say probably one of the bigger challenges I see in fashion is that on the one hand, it's designed to always be novel, and you should always want sort of the latest and the greatest. But at the same time, you need to extend the life of a piece of clothing. So I mean, managing to balance that out, I think, is a challenge that the fashion industry would have to take on. But I mean, on the positive side of things, there are still so many people that, I mean, it's both challenging and positive, I guess, but there are so many people that haven't had access to fashion yet. So if you manage to fix this before you sort of roll it out to the rest of the to the rest of the growing middle class, then you can get it right from the beginning.
Great. I'm sure we'll be coming back to that whole notion of, do we reduce in some places to give us capacity in others, and also the whole idea of the growth paradigm that isn't just around fashion, but fashion is a very visible representation of it. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's all about innovation. When you look at fashion, textiles, clothing, if you look at the past 100 years, up until 1950, there was a lot of innovation, right? New molecules, new chemicals, really great. But the past, I'd say maybe even 50 years, there's only 3 real, innovations that have really increased the chemicals that we use in clothing. Polyester was discovered in the 40s, and that was the new molecule. You have Tencel. It's things haven't been discovered in the past 40, 50 years. So the reason that it's kind of important to kind of figure out why that is, what we found is the textiles industry in specific has been so commoditized, right? So every step down all the way back to petroleum, it's commodities. Innovation hasn't been able to outpace that. So what you have is everything just gets commoditized down. If you can introduce innovation to that life cycle, you can make something that's more valuable. It's more valuable to be sustainable. So you can only get that through some sort of reworking of an existing idea or a brand new thing that you're looking at. So innovation, definitely, for sure.
Great. And I'm sure we'll be hearing a little bit more about amber cycles in a while. Thank you, Richard.
There's been an awful lot of news this week about elephants and rhinos, at least here in the UK, thanks to our royal visit to India. Whether you're interested in an individual species or a great big ecosystem such as the Amazon, which of course is vital not just for nature but also in terms of dealing with the carbon dioxide that we have on the planet, providing water supplies. It's really, if we don't look after the basic ecosystems that form the basis of these systems that Alan was just talking about, the green cycle and the more technical cycle, I mean, we actually have to look after these basic ecosystems while actually providing a better life for a lot more people in the coming 20 or 30 years. I think the real challenge for the fashion industry, as it is also for other industries, it's to, of course, continue delighting customers. It's providing clothing that people want to wear that provides also the functional needs that we have. At the same time, the industry has to incorporate the actual real costs of actually producing this stuff. And if there's one fundamental shift that needs to be made, it's paying the true costs of all of the inputs and the production and then the recycling. And that's, I think, also a reason why I also would applaud Alan for taking this very economic approach, because actually if we don't incorporate the real cost of all this stuff, we actually are not going to manage those closed loops, and we're not going to be able to actually live with a population of 9 billion people on a finite planet without really destroying many of those fantastic things we care about, including, of course, those very cute and cuddly rhinos and elephants that we've seen a lot of.
Great, thank you, Richard.
I'd like to actually pick up on the economic side of things and the innovation side of things. It's very easy to be frightened when you look at what's happened, but actually what's happened is just an evolution of the Industrial Revolution that's kind of exponentially increased. It started out actually without much impact at all, and actually we can see now, and the plastics report that we did looking at the amount of plastics leaking into the ocean is actually a big deal, and something we actually even today don't really understand at all. So it's easy to be concerned, but actually what we found through painting a broad vision of a regenerative, restorative system, which we don't have all the answers for by a long way. We probably know 1 or 2% of the circular economy, but the moment you turn that on its head and you look at the systemic change and you think of the innovations that you need to create that, and you look at the economic rationale now into the trillions that stack up to say this is the right thing to do economically for business, for growth, for employment, for Europe. Actually, this, our current global economy does not work. It's flawed. It's based on finite materials, and we're using them faster and faster. So unless we build an economy that can work, that's as much, if not more, of an issue for us than it is for the animals. I mean, actually, the economy doesn't work. That's a big deal for us. That's our children, that's our grandchildren, that's all our relatives. That's a big deal. So when you turn it on its head and you say, actually, there is a different model that's restorative, regenerative, that's all about innovation, creativity, rethinking, that businesses are pushing for because there's economic rationale to do it, then the conversation is all about opportunity. We never talk about the issue of a circular economy. It's an opportunity. There's a massive opportunity right there now for the taking. We can do it now. We don't have all the answers, but we can move in the right direction. And that's why we're so motivated by the global partners of the foundation who say, yes, we don't have all the answers, but this is where we're going. We're going to work it out on the way.
Great, thank you. And in fact, if I can, continue, because there's actually a lot of questions just coming out. It's great that you picked up on a couple of the other things that were coming through. But, and if I can continue that conversation then with you, because obviously for you to have made something so personal and to have been closer to nature than most of us will ever dream of, and putting nature at the centre of our economy, and looking at the costs with nature at the centre of it. If we look at natural systems and look at natural cycles, they tend to be lots of different cycles at very small scales, whereas the fashion industry tends to be, although it has got a very great number of small businesses, it tends to have this dominant large scale. So how do you see within fashion and circularity being able to navigate back and forth between large and small scales?
Well, I'd say that actually in natural systems, you have all different scales. In the rainforest, you have the tiny little microbes, you have the mycelium in the ground, and you have massive, great big trees. You then have, the trees which are a tiny part of the rainforest, which is a huge system in its own right. Ocean's the same. You've got the tiny little, particles, and then you've got the Pacific Ocean. They're massively different scales, and I think, our economy is no different. Nature needs a mixture of scales in order to thrive. That's how it thrives. Take the big trees away, it all falls down. Take the little microbes away, it all falls down. Actually, we need that too. And if you look at the big systems, take H&M as a system. As Anna said, actually, they're already looking into publishing, X, Y, and Z about their first and their second tier suppliers. They're not the size of H&M. Maybe some are bigger if they supply many companies. But actually, it's a system. It's all a system, and it's not just H&M that sells the clothing. It's the chemical companies that work behind the scenes on the materials. It's the waste companies that reprocess some of the materials that don't even know how they'll reprocess the materials in the future. But there's many, many different sizes and scales that all come down to the individual.
Yeah, and in fact, even within this panel, we've got things at lots of different scales and actually supporting each other. So the Global Challenge Award supporting you guys, for example. So I think it is interesting, but I think that it's great to hear from you that we're talking about those different scales, because I think there's been a lot of talk around circularity that sounds as if maybe it's about big business, whereas actually we need to talk about it across lots of different scales. Yeah. So thank you. So switching back again to this idea of different people doing things in different ways and connecting, Michael, we know already that people tend to behave in a more environmentally positive way if they see people around them doing so, if it becomes a norm, if it becomes social practice. We know that there's climate science consensus around climate change, and yet there isn't social consensus. What you're doing is kind of creating this kind of social consensus and being able to make good something that's quite easy to do. What do you see as, what happens when you take things back, you sell them for people? What do you think is the greatest opportunity within what you're doing? And what would you like to see happen further along the system to enable you to do more of what you're doing?
So, I mean, we're basically coming from the fact that we all have things at home that we don't use, and it doesn't really make sense to have perfectly fine clothes and items lying around. And we need to increase the utilization rate, right? So, so that's sort of the main idea behind Selfie, and sorry.
So with what you do, is it something that's quite easy and you've got the whole kind of system going, or are there elements of it that you think, actually, this is the next step, this is what we need to happen? So you've got the award, what next?
Yeah, okay, so we started from the very bottom. We have a very bottoms-up heavy approach. So we kicked it off by selling our own things, and we packed everything in IKEA bags, and we've sort of started, so we grew from a basement a year ago that was like 23 square meters, and we have all the different parts of the process in place, but there are so much more efficiency gains to be made out of it. And I mean, so we're a customer-to-customer company for sure, but it's, I'd say, 95% about logistics. I mean, how do we collect the things? How do we process them? How do we take the pictures? How do we make sure we don't lose them in the warehouse? And then it's also very labor-intensive for sure.
Okay. And so what's the thing that you've learned the most since you set it up about people? Do you find that you've inundated with people wanting to use the service, or are you having to go out and try to encourage people to use the service?
So I guess we've discovered a couple of things. One is that people have a lot of stuff at home. That I mean, we had no idea how much things they had. And I mean, when we got started, we actually didn't think we were going to sell clothes at all, because we thought, I mean, who buys used clothing online? And we quickly realized that, well, a lot of people do, and it's also sort of the biggest piece or category of things that you have at home. So currently, I think 70% of everything we sell is fashion items.
Really?
Yeah.
70%? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
So, if I can just add there, I mean, I'm a person who has some stuff at home, so I've actually been using Selfie as well, and I think you were mentioning that before, Micke, that one of the most important things for you was to make it easy for customers to actually give the things to Selfie, and to make that, change in customers' behavior and making that something that can be done quite easily and quickly. And I think that's also, for us, looking at how we can change customers' behavior and making sure that they value the clothes that they have and that they can give them a new life. It's really about making that an easy thing for the customer so that they can feel that they're part of the solution rather than the problem. And I think that Selfie is a really great example of that.
Yeah. Great. So you're galvanizing people to do things with the things that are redundant in their homes, that already exist. And actually, you're doing something at the opposite end of the spectrum, things that we don't see, apparently. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and how that potentially could impact the fashion industry?
Yeah. So we're developing a process that can take waste polyester and convert it into new polyester. And for us, it's really simple. How can we do that cheaper than oil? If we can do that, then great. If we can't, we need to keep on working. That's basically what it is. And the only way that we'll really be happy with what we're doing is if we're doing it at the large scale, 1 million, 2 million tons a year, at least minimum. So the challenge is competing with oil and making it price preferred to buy a recycled product, because you shouldn't want to pay more for it. It should be something that you should do not because it makes you feel good, but also because it's cheaper. So if you can do that, you can solve the entire problem. Unfortunately or unfortunately, I think fortunately, we live in a really capitalist society. So if you approach it from that, it's a very simple solution. So what we're doing is, if we're not economically competitive or preferred, then we have to get there. So that's everything that we do. Can we make polyester cheaper than petroleum-based polyester?
And how can people find out more about what you're doing, and what's the kind of time lapse between you working on this, you guys together, and something that people will be able to access?
Yeah, so the biggest thing with technology is it's very hard to predict when you'll go to market. What we like to think is, in the next 10 years, this problem will be solved. There will be a closed-loop system that maybe we might not do, but someone else will do. The technology is there to essentially turn all of polyester, it's specific, into new polyester, and then it's just really implementing it. So the technology is going to be there. We're really working hard on scaling it right now. So it's really hard to put figures right now to it, but I'm really confident that in the next 99.9% confident that in the next 10 years, this problem is going to be solved. There's more pressing issues that need to be solved.
Right.
So this
and as Ellen said, we tend to think that unless we can see something right now, that it's not going to change. But you see, in 10 years, things can change so dramatically.
So dramatically.
So the technology exists. We just need to get to the point where we can actually make it accessible.
It's really a question of, okay, technology's there, great, fantastic. How do you implement it in a really good way to make it cost competitive, or cost preferred, actually? Probably like 30%. So that's the goal. And it takes time. It just takes time. That's how science goes.
And Richard, if I can come back to you on this idea of incentives and costing in the true full costs of nature in a process. There are some companies that are looking at that in different ways. What do you think, from a fashion perspective, we could do better? I'm sure you know about the environmental profit and loss accounting that is being undertaken now, and more companies are starting to look at those kind of ideas. What do you see as the kind of potential of that, or what else could we be doing?
Yeah. Well, just first to say that I think we've already touched on two of the sort of fundamental pieces that need to change in the coming years. First of all, it's the whole the supply chain and how that all comes in, whether we're using virgin or recycled materials, and also the whole consumer experience is going to change. And I think with it also, also the business models of companies like H&M. I think that would also be really interesting to sit down and try to figure out what the company should look like in 10 or 20 years' time. Because actually your current business model of making stuff and selling it to customers and even bringing it back afterwards is perhaps not going to be the right model in terms of actually, we'll be moving into these type of, lease your wardrobe instead of actually buying your wardrobe. Or, there's some ideas going in that way, and I think there's some really interesting ideas moving that way. If we actually are going to start pricing in some of these, what the economists call the externalities, so whether it's the water pollution or the too much water use in certain areas, overuse of chemicals in manufacturing or in growing cotton or other materials, or the whole carbon side. The problem that we have is that individual companies can't deal with this alone, or they can, but they tend to go out of business pretty fast. So we need much more sector collaboration. So we need actually companies to get together to think about how can we, in a sort of, what's our sort of corporate stewardship model where together we can actually start changing these, making sort of pre-competitive agreements about how we're going to, give better prices for things. And then also, I'm afraid, we also need governments to get involved. I don't think we have a solution to problems of this scale without getting governments involved somewhere. And of course, that usually means things take a long time. But I think that when you start combining, our experience from working in sort of multi-staker setup, when you have companies, governments, and some NGOs together, somebody is always trying to move faster than the other, and sort of challenging each other to keep moving. So I think, but really, for a company like H&M, what you're doing now is great within the company, and I know that from some of your work elsewhere, you're also trying to play that sector role as well. We really need the whole fashion sector to get together and start dealing with some of these fundamental problems. And, you see some sort of, points of light where people are addressing the labor conditions in manufacturing. That's great. That's part of the... We can't lose that sort of focus in future as well. We need to... That part of, reuse, recycling, responsibility is really, really important. We mustn't lose that side of it as well in actually trying to close all these different loops.
Yeah. Thank you. I know, Ellen, you wanted to...
I'd just pick up on the government point, which I think is very interesting. We work kind of in two different ways with government. We have a government and cities program within the Circular Economy 100, which is effectively an innovation platform, and we have cities, regions from all over the world in there now. But we also have been working with the European Commission, which was mentioned in the intro. And that for us has been a really interesting journey. We were asked about 2.5 years ago to go and present in the inaugural European Resource Efficiency Platform meeting, which was basically saying, here in Europe we're resource poor. And actually that's a challenge moving forward for the economy, for growth, for employment, for innovation. So what do we do about it? And we presented in the inaugural meeting. That led to the first iteration of the Circular Economy package. And it was very much led within the Commission by Yanis Potocnik, who was the Environment Minister at the time, an economist, so totally got circular economy. But actually it was seen as being a waste directive. Then when the Juncker government came in, they said, right, circular economy, what we need now is growth and competitiveness, so we're going to put that to the side. We know we need growth, we need employment, we need, Europe needs to progress. And then many of the companies that we work with and some that we don't work with wrote in saying circular economy is actually about growth and competitiveness. It's about employment, it's about building an economy that can not only decouple growth from resource constraints, i.e. bring growth, as Anna said, by decoupling, but it also increases employment. And that's been a very interesting journey because that then led to the new Commission saying, oh, this is actually quite interesting. They then relaunched the Circular Economy package. We presented the Growth Within study that I mentioned briefly at the launch of the public consultation on circular economy. And by the Commission's admission, in fact, Vice President Katainen spoke about this at the launch of the actual package in December last year. He said, actually, for the Commission, this has been an interesting journey, because we can only do this through bringing all the DGs together, all the Directorate Generals together. One sector of the Commission can't make this happen, by definition, because it's systemic change, it's structural change through the whole economy, and I think that's been an interesting journey. We've learnt a huge amount, and I think many of us who've been on that journey have as well.
And this idea that actually bringing different departments together that have never worked together before.
And similar with companies. Companies are the same. Universities are the same.
Yeah.
Actually, everything's in silos, but actually the systemic change can't sit in silos.
Thank you. And then, Anna, this idea then of development and economic development and decoupling it from growth. You talked a little bit about emerging economies. If we're talking about sustaining economies in different parts of the world simultaneously and not using nature's resources, really and truly, does that mean kind of consolidating in some markets so that growth can happen in others? How do we make that balance going forward?
Well, I think that, what we're talking about today, which is circularity, is really what we believe is one solution to the nexus that we're in right now. That we have, on the one side, we have growth, and we have a textile industry that provides a lot of jobs and development opportunities for people and also communities. It's normally an entry point from many low-income markets to transfer into much more industrialized ones. But at the time right now, this is costing the planet too much. It's simply taking too much of resources that we don't have. So we believe that the coupling, taking away the growth from the resource constraints that we have today and finding a space for economic and social development to happen, but within the planetary boundaries, that is really the way forward for the industry. And we are not there yet, but I think that what we're trying to do here is really to set out what is our vision and what we want to drive the industry towards, and also open up this dialogue and conversation around it that is so much needed.
But thank you. But it's interesting everybody's been talking about sort of different dimensions of this. So maybe we move towards businesses in some parts of the world that are look very, very different, and they're not necessarily selling clothes. They're sharing them. They're doing whatever with them. And then other parts of the world, you've got different kinds of models. Does anybody want to respond to this idea of us seeing very different kinds of models in different economic growth need areas? So where there is a real need for economic growth, you've got one model, and where actually there's saturation, that you have a very different model?
I think it's a very interesting point, and one which we talk a lot about at the foundation. In fact, we're about to do a big study this year on China and India, looking at that exact same point, because many people see circular economy as being kind of Western world focused, and actually it's not really the reality at all. It's global supply chains. And just two thoughts. One is, in an emerging market, you have the opportunity to leapfrog the linear system that we've built in the, in the developed markets. There's a massive opportunity there. We don't understand all the numbers yet, but investing in the correct infrastructure up front and the right systems and the, the selfies of the future, actually that could happen straight away. There's a benefit there. But also, when you look at remanufacturing, that tends to be regionalized. So, the global supply chains that we have, something's made here, it gets shipped to here, it gets sold here, it gets reprocessed here. It's kind of that big shipping, and then it's kind of, once it leaves your home, it's at the end of its journey. But the moment you start to look at products of service and switch to remanufacturing, just take the car engines as an example, they're remanufactured in a centralized area, but remanufacturing tends to be across territories. It's not kind of all in one place in the world. You wouldn't ship everything back to Asia to remanufacture, even if it was manufactured there in the first place. So actually there are opportunities all over for, for different scales to come back to that first point of operation, because you're shifting business models. It's not just trying to speed up and make a little bit more profit out of that, that linear system. You're trying to change the whole system in its entirety.
Yes. And I can also add to the, to the local perspective in Sweden, and just emphasize the fact that just because you're circular doesn't mean that you can't grow. One of the most amazing things for me personally with Sellpy is that we're basically only selling things that people don't want anymore, right? They're written off, they're just lying around. And by doing that, we can still employ 60 people. We have a 2,500 square meter warehouse. It pays for my salary. And only because of the fact that we actually managed to extract value from something that was already created. Yeah. So I think that's very cool.
Yeah, and that comes back to your idea, Anna, of creativity. So we have to start to imagine better a very different kind of supply chain as well, because as you said, if something was made in Bangladesh and then shipped to Europe, if it's going to be remade or reprocessed, then it doesn't necessarily have to go through that same cycle. You could actually look at rebalancing of employment and skills, and whilst employment in the UK might be less of an issue than other places, certainly skills development, which comes back to the agenda of education, which I know we probably haven't got time to veer into today, but I hope through the day we will do so, because I think this actually means a different kind of designer, a different kind of skills, and different kinds of ways in which we consider what fashion is and how it's made, what it looks like, and how we experience it. But I know there's a lot of people in the room who are part of all of those stakeholders, and actually we've been talking about governments, we've been talking about businesses coming together and collaborating. We have representatives from various government areas. We have people who are here from different businesses, from different academic disciplines. So I would like now to be able to throw the questions open to the audience. What we're going to do is take some questions from you guys, and also we've got Twitter questions coming in from around the world, because all this session is being live streamed, and we have a number of people both from businesses, from academia, and from government organisations who are listening in. So who would like to ask the first question before I then look at this tweet question, which is quite interesting coming in? Anybody want to go first? Lola, please can you say who you are and what you'd like to ask? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Lola Young, and I'm a member of the House of Lords, an independent member, and I co-chair the all-party parliamentary group on ethics and sustainability in fashion, and Dilys is part of the secretariat for that group, for which many thanks. Several comments have been made about government, and there's loads of questions and loads of comments I could make too. But one of the things that strikes me is that although we can see how it's possible and indeed necessary to decouple economic, or the current model of economic development, from thinking about resource constraint, a lot of politicians find this really, really difficult, certainly in this country, I think, whatever political party they come from. So how can we stop that competition between departments, which goes Department for Business needs a certain kind of economic growth, Department for Work and Pensions needs a certain number of people in employment doing certain kinds of things, Department for the Environment wants something else, etc., etc. How can we move towards that model of cross-departmental working? It's really, really hard for politicians to grasp the need for that, I think.
Thank you. Would anybody like to respond to that? Yeah,
I'm happy to. Always nice to have a difficult question. I think it's a really, really valid point, and it's one of the biggest barriers to the circular economy is the thinking, because we're not used to working outside our silos. You know, when I went through the education system, you know, I didn't end up going to university, I went sailing instead, but you did a subject. It was a subject, you know, you stayed within a box. What box are you going to step into is almost how education, if you're going to go on to further education, is. There are very few subjects you can study which are cross-curricular that, you know, that cover many subjects. And I think that's just as much of a challenge within business. It's just as much challenge as it was within the European Commission. You know, the circular economy package never worked when it sat with the Environment Commissioner, regardless of the fact he was an economist, because it was seen as being in a box. And actually, I think that the opportunity of the circular economy is not a box at all, because it's systemic change right across the broader economy. It has, you know, huge positive implications for CO2 emissions. It has huge positive implications for farming and agriculture being restorative and regenerative. It has huge opportunities for industry, for remanufacturing, for new emerging innovators like Selfie or Airbnb that 5 years ago was just the same size and actually no one had heard of, and suddenly, you know, it's the biggest hotel chain in the world. Actually, these examples don't sit within a box by definition, and you know, we've been on many journeys with businesses, H&M included, as to so how do you actually create that cross silo or cross, you know, government department conversation? And you know, we don't have all the answers for that, but having a common goal seems to help. You know, what we found within the Commission is, you know, if there's a benefit for employment, there's a benefit for growth, there's a benefit for decoupling, there's a benefit for CO2. There's, you know, if you can look at all of these benefits, then actually you can have a conversation about one thing rather than it being arguing.
And if we've never had a bigger imperative to actually have a shared vision than climate change, then we never will have. So.
Yeah, but also growth. You can start talking about circular economy for someone who has no interest whatsoever in climate change, and there are still many out there, because they know we have finite resources and we have a, you know, growing world population, and they want growth. The most hard-hitting business leader, you know, we've engaged with many of them. You know, we work with the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation, for example. You know, because we're talking about a different economic model that we believe improves employment levels and decouples growth from resource constraints. And actually, when you talk about the hard facts, you can open that door and you can move through. You don't end up in a box. Not that any box is wrong, but you can't create systemic change by being in any box. You know, be it any of the boxes.
Yeah. And that's your reference then again to that happening in government, in business and in education, that has to cross in all of those areas. And certainly it's starting to do so. And Sustainable Apparel Coalition, for example, is a good example of that in fashion. Yes, sorry, Richard.
Just to complement, I mean, I think there's two additional things which are really important. One is, of course, leadership. Whether it's in a government or a business, you actually have to have people at the top who actually know where they're trying to go and not just reacting to what's happening that day or that week. And the second piece is, and then again equally applicable to government or to business, is some kind of long-term test. So rather than the next quarter or the next electoral cycle, there needs, I mean, you know, we need to put something into our way of working where it doesn't just have to pass the short-term test, but that there's a 10, 15-year test that's also applied to whether it's a political, legislative decision or to a business decision. And I think that's a sort of, you know, basic change that will need to take place if we're going to get out of this, what is really a dilemma at the moment of dealing with the short-term things and basically screwing up the world long-term.
Yeah, and it's not even making us happy, apparently. I'm going to turn now to a tweet question, so there's a few coming in. So, how can fast fashion, let's be honest, buying clothes we don't really need, ever be sustainable?
I guess that's one for me, right?
if you're happy to take that, then go ahead.
Well, I mean, to begin with, I mean, for H&M, we don't want people to buy things that they don't need. We want them to buy things that they want, that they will love and that they will really take care of and value, because that's really important with the clothes that you have. They should be great pieces that you have in your wardrobe and that you want to have for a really long time. And then I think it's all about coming back to the question we talked about in the beginning. So we know we're going to be 9 billion people in 2050. And no matter how we think about it, those people will need clothes somehow. And we also want to be in business in 2050. And we think that with the size and the scale that we have a role to play there. And I think it's not a matter about denying the people in 2050 not to have clothes, but to make sure that we can actually provide that in a sustainable way, where clothes are made under good working conditions, and were they made with great materials, and also having the circular approach to the whole system of things. So we're not there yet, and I think that's also why we're here today, because we are jointly seeking answers on how to achieve that. But to us, this is at the beginning of really working towards that direction, and we're also inviting everyone else in this industry to join us here.
Right. But if we're thinking about the amount of garments that are made, 150 billion at the moment, and we know from the fact that Selfie's making a great business out of it, that whilst we're saying that we're buying things we want, actually we're not wearing them, they're just sitting there, we're buying them, not wearing them for very long, and because of the churn, which at the moment does degrade natural resources, this huge shift needs to not just be in our resource use, it also needs to be in the perception of fashion and how we buy it, what we value, etc. So what do you see fast fashion as looking like in 10 years' time?
Well, I think was saying that, in 10 years, this industry can, of course, look in a really different way. And I think that for H&M, all we know that we want to be in business in 2050 as well. And we believe that we have an opportunity to really provide clothes for the people who will be there. But then we're also fully open to revising the way that the business model looks today. And I think that no one in this industry really has an answer to what it will be like in the next 10 years. But this is a movement that is happening. And we just want to be part of taking a lead in that and driving that towards a sustainable future.
Great. And actually, I'm not supposed to be asking the question now, am I? So there's two people here. Maybe we take a couple. In fact, the hands are going up everywhere now. So maybe if we can take three or four questions, please keep them short, and then we'll put them together. So the two people in the front here.
Hi, I'm Kate Rayworth. I'm a renegade economist writing a book about how to think like a 21st century economist, and I'm a big fan of circular economy. It's really clear from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's reports that there's a lot of growth to be had in growing towards a circular economy, but nothing in nature grows forever. From our children's feet, thank God, to the Amazon rainforest, everything grows until it reaches a dynamic balance with everything in which it is included as a part. So to me, part of the journey and the exciting journey towards circularity, I think the most exciting challenge in that is creating business models of sustainability and circularity for businesses that can thrive whether or not they're growing. And that means transforming relationships with shareholders, with ownership of the company, with profit expectations, with financing demands. I would love to hear what anyone on the panel's experience of that from whichever kind of organization you're in, whether you agree with that, and if so, what possibilities you can see out there, even though it's incredibly challenging because we live in a growth-centric world where growth itself appears to be justification, but we know it's not natural in a sustainable system.
That's too good a question for me to take any others for a minute, so I'm going to throw that one back to you guys. Who would like to respond, please?
Do you want to go? I'm happy to.
We can take a number of responses.
Yeah, I mean, there's I forget who was the famous person who said it. If living on a finite planet, if you believe in infinite growth, you're either crazy or an economist. So I think it's great that you're looking into this area and actually sort of trying to lay bare some of the obvious sort of dilemmas or the inconsistencies in the way that we're thinking. I haven't actually, there are some little signs of even business leaders trying to move in this direction. Paul Polman is probably the rock star of the CEOs at the moment in terms of sustainability and in trying to actually put a sustainable business growth in front of his quarterly profits. He was at least setting a new trend. To be honest with you, I don't think he's still got a long way to go to actually decouple the need for quarterly profits over the success of his business. But the success of Marks & Spencer here in the UK in actually putting in a very ambitious plan on sustainability and actually showing that they save money by doing it. So it's, again, these are little steps in the right direction. I don't think they get to the fundamental, actually paying the true costs of things and actually starting to take apart this consumer-driven growth economy. I think if we knew the answer to that one already, we would already be advocating for it. But I think it's exactly the right question to be asking. And I think we have lots of hours today that we can also partly break our heads on this particular issue.
And yes, so this whole idea of how much is enough, when do we actually get to a point where we can stop growing, how can we thrive beyond that?
Just quickly, I think it's a really interesting point, and we've challenged this a lot internally within the foundation as well as externally. What does the future look like? I think there are different forms of growth. what we know is the current form of growth, the linear economy, can't run in the long term. We do see huge corporations disappear, and they have done. You know, since we had corporations, they've come and they've gone. Some have stayed a long time, and some haven't. And I think what we're going to see is a differentiation between those that take a more circular approach and think about how they can decouple that growth from resource constraints, thus making themselves more investable and more resilient as a business, because they're not, you know, tied to these huge raw material price hikes with volatility. But the other point made me think very quickly was on small businesses. The majority of businesses in the world aren't big corporates, they're small businesses. They employ the majority of people in the world, not big corporates. And actually, a lot of those small businesses don't want growth at all. If it's a couple with a sandwich business, actually, if they can then pass on the business to their son and they can, you know, perfectly easily get make a living from the sandwich business, actually that's not just about, you know, suddenly employing 100 people. Not everybody is like that. So I know there's a corporate shareholder return, and I think that can be a positive thing when you're trying to drive growth in a positive direction. Like, you know, working with huge companies like H&M, they can have massive change. If they're trying to put change in the right place, it will be huge. And I don't think we should underestimate that.
But I think actually talking about small businesses being able to stay steady for the fashion industry, that is a big problem, because there's amazing, huge numbers of small businesses in the fashion industry who get caught into that kind of paradigm of thinking they do have to grow, and then they actually become something that isn't what they set out to be. So I think businesses that are micro are in a great position, and then there's this big void that those businesses, particularly in fashion, because they're encouraged to show, which costs lots of money, then they have to sell more in order to do that. So being able to create models for fashion that actually can stay small and steady is, I think, an amazing opportunity for us in many countries, but certainly in this country, where we have a lot of designers who go out of business purely for that reason, that they felt that they have to grow, and then they've fallen. But I'm sure there's a few people that could talk about that. Solitaire, I'm going to take your question, and then we'll take some tweets. Oh, sorry, and I said come back. So Solitaire, and then I'll come back to you, and then we'll go to the back.
Hi, Solly Townsend from Futerra, and we've spoken a lot this morning about systems and business models of circularity, but of course there's no circularity without us, the citizens and the consumers, because there's that action that we're required to do to make any of this work, really. And I'm just reflecting on the idea of recycling and the fact that a recycling bin is just another bin. And as soon as something goes in the recycling bin, it's waste. And so clothes go from wearable to waste, even in our heads. And it loses an enormous amount of emotional value. It's like emotional entropy when things go in the bin. So we've got things like Shelby, Futerra One swishing. How can we maintain the inherent value, the style, the beauty, the wearability of stuff in the circular economy, rather than having to go through this sort of binnable stage where it loses, and I've seen inside the bins in Take Back, you've got clothes in there, but you've also got kind of crisp packets and what have you. A bin is a bin. How can we get out of that bin mentality and into valorization, into value with clothes?
Yeah. Great question. So, yes, but I'm going to take a couple so we can hold on to that whole idea of how can fashion be something that maintains or increases its value to get rid of the bin. So I'm going to take the question here and then a couple at the back.
Okay, yes, I have a question for you, Anna. I'm Anna Emelin. I'm from Stockholm Resilience Center. I work there as a communication advisor. And in that role, we often are invited to design schools and to give lectures for people who want to become designers. But I have also worked 4 years in Russia, implementing the IMO standard, building a factory. So I know what it looks like in the other end. And I've been through some pretty hard moments thinking about what big companies, big Swedish companies, what is it that we really contribute with. And I do come to the idea that we are really great at design, at developing systems, at giving people opportunity to express themselves through fashion and through design. And I really strongly believe in that and think that H&M and IKEA, for example, can do something to change big industries. But my question is how, because I was standing receiving like instructions for how to set up a factory for producing a Billy bookcase. So I understood that, okay, the designers of these products, they have not worked through the whole cycle. They have not been doing collaborative design. They have not
I'm
had
going to ask you to come straight to the direct question, just because we're going to take a couple.
Yeah, so my question is really, I mean, I would like to put this question like very, very straight and then say, how much do you need to invest in the designers you have? Hours, money, or long-term strategy? How are you going to get the designers that can actually take on the tasks of designing for the whole cycles?
Okay, so you got that one? Great. So importance of design, different kinds of design. And there are a couple at the back. If I can take a couple at the back, and then we'll pull them together. Please hold those questions.
Hi there, my name's Ben. I've been a renegade pants maker for the last 10 years, running Pants to Poverty. And over that period, I've really been kind of confronted by many of the issues that we've been discussing today. And seeing the kind of inspiration and the dialogue that everybody has is always really, really exciting. But one of the challenges that we have is how do we translate this into tangible metrics and things that we can actually understand and carry them forward into our businesses. And it kind of seems to fit into three different economies that we're talking about. We're governed principally by the financial economy, and then we're talking in circular around the environmental economy, and we're also discussing the social economy. And there's a real need for talking about the true costs and how we can bring the true cost accounting into the way the business is done. And my question is, given the assumption that we can put values to things and that people can come to consensus around these things, to what extent could things like the Sustainable Development Goals be a real opportunity for business, government and certification systems to come together to actually start to make change around this area now, not when it's too late?
Great, thank you. And last one, and then we'll pull
Hello,
those
I'm
together.
Rachel Wilshaw from Oxfam. And at the risk of opening another kind of angle on the discussion, but I do think it's an important angle that hasn't been covered so far, and that is about the social aspects of sustainability. I know today is primarily about the environment, but, you know, for instance, Ellen has been talking about the opportunities for growth in jobs through the circular economy. Our concern is that we've just done a study in Myanmar that found that workers are working 16 hours a day, making garments for companies including H&M, and even when they earn the minimum wage, they are well below the poverty line. So to turn that into a sort of positive question, which is in the spirit of this discussion, do you see the circular economy as an opportunity to improve the quality of jobs for the workers making your products? And do the panel have any comments on how the circular economy can take more account of the social aspects? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So all of those actually relate to value in some way. So valuing what we have, so it's not binned, thinking about the value of design, thinking about different kinds of value and different ways in which we acknowledge that, and then thinking about that from a perspective of people and their value in creation of fashion. So who would like to kick off with any responses to any of those? Michael.
Yes, I'd love to address the first question. I think it raises two very important aspects, both the amount of work that sort of each individual consumer has to put in order to actually be part of the circular economy. And the other one is definitely the emotional aspect to it. So, I mean, at Sellpy, we just wanted to make it as simple and easy as possible to get rid of your things, right? So we just have a bag, you can fill it with anything you'd like, as long as it fits inside. But then we take it to the warehouse and we treat each item individually, right? So we take the pictures, you can sort of track your own sales and you can follow along in the auction. And we've noticed that, I mean, certainly the ease of use is sort of the main driver behind happy customers, but then they also get a lot more connected to the things throughout sort of the sales process, right? Many of our customers, they tell us, I'm just happy to get rid of this and I just never want to see it again. But then we still see them log in and they watch the bids and they have feedback on the pictures and even though the items have already sort of left, they're still emotionally attached to them. Mm-hmm. So I mean, our end vision is rather to add another bin next to the recycling bin, which would be a Sellpy bin, where you
Can we get rid of the word bin and have
bin.
a beautiful box?
We call it a bag. Yeah.
There's a design opportunity in there.
Yeah, I should have brought the bag, but I forgot it. Where you just, as soon as you stop using the item, you just put it in the bag, whenever it's full, you order a pickup, and then you get a new bag. So that's
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Can
Richard,
I jump in? Okay,
yeah.
let me start with the last question around whether the circular economy is also an opportunity for promoting better social values. And I think it clearly is, or it clearly should be, and I think it can be, because I think to actually make the circular economy function properly, we really have to know much more about where stuff comes from and how that is produced, and know not just about its technical characteristics, but also all these intangible, invisible things, such as whose hands run this product, how much did that person get paid, how many hours did they have to work to actually get that paid, what happened to the water that was used to actually produce this, or the chemicals for the dye stops. I mean, I think to make the circular economy work, we need to get much better at traceability and much more. I think with the whole new world of big data, there's really there's a sort of twin opportunity here. We need it, and there's a whole set of infrastructure which is being developed now, thanks to the internet revolution, to actually make this possible, to the extent that you can have it on your mobile phone eventually at the end of the day. So, as long as we keep driving on that piece of the R for responsibility, and make sure that we have the social piece in there as well, I think it's a really big opportunity.
Yeah, they can't be disconnected. Anna?
Yeah, I can just follow on that question as well, and I think it's a really valid point to raise, even though the discussion today is very much about the environmental side. But when we talk about having a truly sustainable fashion industry, we of course see both the environmental side and the social side of that. What we're here to discuss today is very much about the resource use and how we can find solutions towards that, where we see that circularity is definitely the way that we see forward. But of course, we also have the social aspects. And actually looking at our sustainability work today, that is where we put most of our resources today, to make sure that these jobs that are provided by the textile industry are good and fair jobs. We know that there are a lot of challenges, because that's inherent when you work in complex markets like Cambodia and Bangladesh and Myanmar. But once again, we think that we have the size and the scale, and also coming back to what the Swedish companies bring to the table, we also have the values of really trying to create better working conditions and make sure that you have people who can actually live on their wages and actually grow and thrive within the textile industry. Also coming back to the question for the SRC, which is one of the organizations we've also been working with in this process, I think it's difficult to put a number or on the investments or the amounts of hours and so on that we're going to invest in making this happen. But of course, this will create that our whole organization is working in that direction, of course. And I think one of the benefits, I think, from working at H&M is not only are we big, but we also have a great commitment all the way from our CEO on working on those issues. And thirdly, we also have a very integrated approach to working with sustainability. So for me, working at a sustainability department, we are responsible for setting a direction, but then it's up to each and one of the other functions to actually make this happen throughout the whole organization. So we need to have our buying office and designers on board. We need to have the ones who are designing the stores and purchasing the materials to be in the stores there as well. So for us, this is really about integrating this in our whole way of working. Should I take that one really quickly as well?
Yes, I'm sure we are going to have to move on, I think. Yes, so let's take a tweet question. So the moment you are there, it is gone, Ellen MacArthur. What will happen when H&M reaches its goals?
Yes, so very, very quickly then. But from my perspective, first of all, when we reach our goals, I will be very, very happy. And secondly, I will probably not have a job. But I think that,
back to that lovely place in Sweden you came from.
Exactly. I'll go back to Östersund and go skiing in the mountains. No, but I mean, the vision we have set out to be 100% circular, of course, we need to boil this down into time-bound goals and targets, and that is going to take a long time to get there. We don't know exactly when right now. That's the internal work we have left to do. But I think that once we're starting to open up on this approach as well, we will find a lot of different opportunities and solutions as well, because this is not about limiting ourselves or confining the space that we're working on. I think this can really unleash a lot of creativity, new opportunities, and hopefully also new business models that will make us continue to thrive and develop in the future.
No one's picked up on the SDG point, which I think is very interesting. Measuring circularity is one thing you mentioned. How do you measure this? And obviously it's incredibly difficult to measure. It's been suggested many times at the World Economic Forum with the Meta Council, let's measure a region or a city and say, how circular is it? And quite frankly, we really don't have all the answers when it comes to a complex systems change. because it's not just about, reducing waste at the end. It's also, Airbnb would be a great example of how you create circularity and unlock, previously unused space within the economy. You're finding the value in something that's there already. So it's incredibly difficult to measure. But I do think that linking circular economy into the SDGs is something that's very important. It's relevant to many sectors, and we are having conversations along those lines. But trying to kind of measure it before you're ready, I think, is a bit of a pitfall. I think from a company perspective, it's much easier. And actually, just to pick up on Anna's point, I find it hugely heartwarming for Anna to say, I'll be really happy when it's done, even just by implying that this could happen while she's here. I mean, isn't that? I think that from our perspective, I think that's absolutely awesome. And as to whether we can ever be 100% anything, I'm not sure we can. We're always going to have entropy. We're always going to have some loss. But if you don't aim for 100%, you'll not even get close. Yeah. And I think I think that's absolutely the right place to aim for. Yeah. And maybe you can get there to exactly 100.
And maybe you'll start a new culture that actually we get to a point where we do have enough money and we can go and actually have different kind of lifestyles that actually use less and we need less. We do get to a point of having enough.
Can I just pick up on that point? Because there's one bit I thought was also interesting. Sorry. Just on the consumer element. And, how can we change in our houses? And when we put things in bins, it feels like a bin. I mean, at the moment, even if every single person in the world wanted to be circular, they can't be. Actually, the end of the chain, we call them users, actually, rather than consumers at the foundation, because, I don't consume my iPhone or my computer or my car or my house. I consume food, but not those things. We use them. But because of the fact, at the moment, we do consume them, effectively, because they pass through our bin, which means it passes out of the system, the system doesn't work, and I think there's a huge amount of emphasis. Well, there's always the feeling that we need to sort this out at home, and actually we're all not doing what we can, and that's actually the system doesn't work. The system has to change to enable us to make the right choice. If the selfies don't exist, then you are putting something in a bin. Something like that comes along. Selfie makes it easy for people. Selfie changes the system. Selfie valorizes things to a higher level, and we've got a huge long way to go to fix the system. But I think, yes, we can all change, absolutely, and we can use selfie rather than putting it in the bin. That is a choice. But we also have to change the system. And I think they're actually
all of those simultaneous things, because actually if we started to completely change how we value what we've got, the system would need to change in response to that as well. So it's a 200-300 way approach, hopefully. And I know that we are 5 minutes. So I know there's going to be a lot of more questions, and there's a lot of more tweets coming in. But because we have got the rest of the day and we've got the different workshops, we're going to wrap this session up now. I just wanted to finish by asking each of you, we heard from Ellen about this idea of having a dream, of being able to make something really, if we want something to happen, we can really imagine it and then make it happen. Can I ask each of you about something that you can imagine happening and that you really dream about happening through this idea of your work and thinking about fashion and its future? Anybody can start. I'm looking at you, Anna, but am I putting you on the spot?
No.
What's your dream? What's your dream? Is it to go back to that lovely place in Sweden?
No, but I think what we're talking about today very much is about creating this systemic change. And I think even though a lot of the solutions are around technology and innovations and collaborations and so on, it is ultimately about the changing the mindset. And I think that would really be my wish for the future, to make sure that everyone, not only the people here in this room or some people along with us, but everyone actually has this kind of mindset about how we value things differently in the economy and how we can actually think newly around how we can provide a sustainable fashion industry in 2050 that can cater for those 9 billion people. So for me, it would really about my wish would be that this mindset change that needs to happen, that the thought around circularity really becomes mainstream.
Great, thank you.
I would like to build on top of that, and I don't only want to change the mindset. I would like to change the behavior as well, and especially so both to have people sell more things. But even more importantly, if we're going to have anything to sell to anyone, we're going to need buyers, right? So, my hope is that we can convert a lot of people who doesn't buy used clothing today to actually have them do it tomorrow.
Thank you. Actually.
Yeah, so our whole vision is when you have something that's wasteful, there are other opportunities that you can, instead of throwing it away, there are other things you can do with it that give you more value than just throwing it away. So what we see is hopefully we can work with people to help make a system that, so if you have a piece of clothing and you're done wearing it, you can throw it away, that's fine. You can also do this other thing. We don't, no one really knows what that's going to be or manifest yet, but you can do this other thing that gives other people more value. So it's an easy decision. It's not like this, oh, should I do this, should I not do this? There's a lot of pressure on consumers. It'll be a really intuitive decision. Oh, I can do this thing, recycle it, put it back in the life cycle, and it benefits me or somehow externally benefits you. So everything becomes value. And then that system will then allow people to then go out and collect stuff. You see that with water bottles. That kind of happens today. But if you can valorize all this waste, you can then encourage people to actually do something with it. Because then it's like, I save money or I feel better or whatever. That valorizes it.
Great. Thank you. Richard.
I have at least a part of a dream for one of the streams of materials used in the fashion industry, and that's for cotton. I've been involved with a group of people from NGOs, from companies, from farmers' representatives for the last 10 years or so to create a thing which is now called Better Cotton. It was just an idea of a few crazy people 10 years ago. It's now, thanks to a whole lot of both government and particularly private sector effort, turned into something which is now nearly, just over 10% of the global cotton production. I would hope that my impossible dream is that you don't even have to ask the question in future, is it better cotton? Because all cotton will be better cotton. And at least one of the key material streams for sustainable fashion will be produced in a way which actually helps the farmers, works in the supply chain, and actually means that we can sort of enjoy the fabric with a sort of good feeling about the clothes we're wearing.
Great. We could have another different hour's discussion about better cotton, but that's for another day. Thank you. So Ellen.
I guess my dream is that every young person, as they grow up, thinks in a circular way, because that will transform the entire economy. The concept of waste will be eliminated, because why would we ever want to lose anything, i.e. not valorize it? Why would you ever make something that can't be valorized? It's crazy, you're losing something out of what is a precious material in an economy. So the change in thinking, and that includes the change in business to employ those young people coming out of education wanting those skills. So it doesn't happen on its own, but if you think differently, you do things differently.
Great, thank you. And in fact, that relates to that last tweet question, which hopefully we'll come on to later on. So we're out of time. Thank you so much, everybody. Please join me in thanking the great panel. Thank you.